the world's fastest Indian, Burt Munro's 44-year obsession. Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm so thrilled you're here, because we're skipping the usual agenda to just jump right into one of the most mind-boggling underdog stories in all of motorsports. We're talking about a guy named Burt Munro and his literal 44-year obsession with a single machine. It's not just about going fast, It's a masterclass in sheer dedication, raw backyard engineering, and what happens when you just totally refuse to accept your own limitations.
So really think about this for a second. How does a 68-year-old grandfather, working out of a tiny backyard shed literally at the edge of the world in Invercargill, New Zealand, build a motorcycle that conquers the globe? I mean, it frames just how impossible this whole thing was. He didn't have a factory team behind him, no corporate sponsors, no million-dollar engineering budget. He had a shed, an absolute passion for speed, and frankly, a level of resourcefulness that borders on supernatural. Okay, let's look at his blank canvas, a stock 1920 Indian Scout. When Burt bought this thing, it had a 600cc engine and maxed out at maybe 55 miles per hour. It was a cruiser, not a racer. But over decades of tinkering, he morphed it into the 1967 Munro Special. We're talking a 953cc absolute monster that could hit over 184 miles per hour. The sheer scale of mechanical transformation on the single machine, spanning nearly half a century, it's just wild. Part 1. The Shed of Innovation. Forging parts from scrap. So, to understand how he bridged that massive gap from 55 to 184 miles per hour, we really have to look at his process. Burt didn't have much money. He was a motorcycle salesman and mechanic. He'd literally work all night in his shed, then go straight to his day job, zero sleep. But that lack of cash, it forced him into becoming an absolute mechanical genius. His rule was, if you can't buy it, you build it. First, he'd melt down scrap metal like old tractor pistons using a blowtorch and an old tin can as a crucible. Then he'd pour that molten aluminum straight into handmade sand molds to cast new parts. After that, he'd take those rough metal pucks and meticulously machine them down on a lathe. And he did this almost entirely by eye and by feel. People say he even used a bicycle spoke as a micrometer. No fancy digital calipers here, just his hands, his eyes, and this crazy intuitive feel for the metal. Because of this, his whole bike became this brilliant patchwork of scavenged engineering. He needed bigger cylinders, right? So he machined them out of old cast iron gas pipes, figuring years of sitting underground had perfectly seasoned the metal. When his stock connecting rods couldn't take the stress, he supposedly spent 5 months hand-carving new ones out of a solid Ford truck axle. And this is my absolute favorite detail. Getting high-speed tires was impossible, so he took standard street tires and used a regular kitchen knife to painstakingly shave the tread down into racing slicks. I mean, it was incredibly dangerous, super crude, but by golly, it worked. Section 2. The Philosophy of Failure. Offerings to the God of Speed. Now, building a machine out of scrap metal means things are going to break. A lot. But for Burt, those constant setbacks were literally the fuel that drove him forward. In his shed, he kept the shelf piled high with shattered pistons, snapped connecting rods, and mangled valves. He playfully called them his offerings to the God of Speed. He didn't see a blown engine as a defeat. To him, every busted piece of metal was mandatory data. It was a lesson. If a part broke, he'd figure out exactly why and engineer a new one that wouldn't fail the same way. He blew up his engine hundreds of times, and every single time he built it back stronger. And he wasn't just tough on the bike. He was unbelievably tough on himself. Racing these homemade rockets was terrifyingly dangerous. During one high-speed run at Bonneville, going about 180 miles per hour, his bike went into a violent death wobble. Instead of panicking and crashing, Burt instinctively lifted his body out of the aerodynamic shell to act as a human air brake. He later noted the wind ripped his goggles off and literally forced his eyeballs back into his head so hard he couldn't see. He laid the bike down and somehow walked away with just a few scratches. Over his lifetime, he suffered concussions, knocked out his teeth, scraped skin off everywhere imaginable. His physical resilience was just as unbreakable as his willpower. Moving on to Section 3, the ultimate test, chasing the Bonneville salt flats. Eventually, the tracks and beaches of New Zealand were just too small for the speeds he was unlocking. His localized obsession needed a global stage, the vast, flat expanse of compacted salt in Utah. It's the absolute mecca for land speed racing. But actually getting to the starting line was a monumental hurdle. First off, his health was failing. He suffered from angina, a really severe heart condition. Second, zero funding.
So to get his bike to America, he worked as a cook on the cargo ship that carried them across the ocean. Once he hit Los Angeles, he bought a beat-up $90 station wagon, slapped a trailer on it, and drove himself out to the Utah desert. And the craziest part? When he finally got there, he wasn't even registered. Officials were going to turn him away. Thankfully, the American racing community saw his pure spirit, stepped in to advocate for him, and got him onto the salt. And once he hit that salt, he made history. In 1962, on his very first racing visit, he completely shocked everyone by setting a class record of 178.97 miles per hour. But he didn't stop there. He kept coming back, always tinkering, always coaxing just a little more speed out of that aging Indian. In '66, he set another record at 168.06 miles per hour. But it was in 1967 that he made his final, ultimate pilgrimage to push the boundaries of what was humanly and mechanically possible. Section 4. The 1967 Bonneville record, the culmination of a lifelong dream. By this point, the bike was a 953cc backyard masterpiece running in the under 1000cc Streamliner modified fuel category. And the guy riding it? 68. I mean, let that sink in for a second. Burt Munro was 68 years old, and his motorcycle was 47 years old. He hit his absolute peak physical and engineering triumph at an age when most folks are well into retirement taking it easy. But not Burt. He was out in the blistering Utah heat strapping himself into a homemade red torpedo. And here is what he achieved: 184.087 miles per hour. This is the official corrected speed, which, fun fact, was actually certified years later when his son caught a math error in the original American Motorcyclist Association paperwork. And that record, it remains completely untouched. As of 2026, the AMA actually ended up retiring his specific class entirely, meaning Burt's record is literally permanently etched into the history books, frozen in time forever. Section 5. A legacy of persistence. What we can learn from Burt Munro. So what's our big takeaway here in this explainer? Burt's story is about way more than just a fast motorcycle. It's this profound lesson in overcoming limited resources and just flat out refusing to quit no matter what the world tells you. And I love this detail. Today, the Munro Special isn't locked away behind some velvet rope in a sterile, silent museum. Nope. Exactly as Burt wanted, his bike stayed in his homeland. It sits proudly right on display in the E. Hayes & Sons Working Hardware store in Invercargill, right there among the everyday tools, the nuts, and the bolts. It's such a poetic reminder that true greatness doesn't need pristine, perfect conditions. It's usually built from the humblest, rawest materials right in front of us. So I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought. If a 68-year-old guy battling heart problems, using scrap metal, tin cans, and a literal kitchen knife in a backyard shed can build the world's fastest motorcycle, what is stopping you from pursuing your own impossible dream? Limitations are usually just a state of mind. Burt Munro proved that. With a clear vision and an unbreakable work ethic, you can make the impossible a reality. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, keep pushing your boundaries, and I'll catch you in the next one.